Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
What is up, sysadmin crew? Welcome to today's episode on learning VMware PowerCLI for the absolute beginner. If you've heard of words like automation or scripting and even seen a couple of really cool demos, then think to yourself, how in the hell do I get started with all this? I want to do exactly the same as these guys are doing. Well, this episode is for you. In the next few minutes, we are going to take you from zero to hero in PowerCLI. And at the end of all this, you guys are going to be creating on your very own this awesome vSphere report. All you need to get started is a Windows server. And in my lab and in this demonstration, I'm going to be using a Windows 2022 server. Then we're going to be going ahead and installing VMware PowerCLI. I'm going to be showing you some basic PowerCLI commands where we can extract data from our vCenter and vSphere environment. And then with a few other little techniques and bits and pieces, then we're going to be creating that awesome vSphere report. The very first thing that we're going to be doing is opening up Windows PowerShell ISE. So we go ahead and click on Start and then click on Windows PowerShell ISE. Within PowerShell ISE, let's go ahead and click on our View menu and then select Show Script Pane. Now, what the hell is going on here? So this script pane at the top is where we're going to be constructing our code. And then as we execute that code, the output for that is going to go from the code window down into the output screen. So we'll be seeing all that output down in that blue section there. And with that, we're ready to put in our first line of code. Out of the box, our Windows 2022 server does come with PowerShell, but it does not come with the VMware PowerCLI module. So we need to go ahead and install that right now. To do that, we use the install-module space VMware.PowerCLI. Don't worry for now too much about the syntax after that, but we'll go ahead, we'll click on number 1 for line number 1. That highlights that line. And then on my keyboard, I'm going to press F8, and that's going to execute anything that's highlighted. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. In this warning message, it's just saying that to download our VMware PowerCLI module, we do need to get it from a certain repository. And to access that repository, we do need to install a provider. So we're going to go ahead and click yes here. Now, the install of this module is going to take just a couple of minutes. So just sit back, chill, and let's just wait for this to finish. The VMware PowerCLI module has now just finished installing. And if this is your very first line of code that you've used in PowerShell, then
congratulations!
Well done. Congratulations. Now we're going to move ahead and continue on some more cool stuff. So let's go ahead. Let's close this window. And the reason why we're closing this window, you don't need to save this script for now. The reason why we're closing this window and then reopening PowerShell ISE is because that module contains a whole heap of commands. And those commands are available in the Commands tab on the right-hand side here, which is this bit here. And we can enter anything in this name field, and it'll search a list of all the commands and modules that PowerShell knows about. And we can then use those commands in our scripts. Now, your second line of code is going to be pasted in right now. This line of code tells PowerCLI to prompt us and ask us what it wants to do if it connects into a server and that server is deemed to have an invalid certificate. So to set that invalid certificate action to prompt, we're going to go ahead, click on line 1. That's going to select it. And then we're going to press F8 on our keyboard. It's asking us if we want to confirm that setting. So we'll go ahead and click yes. Now that that's configured into the system, we're going to go ahead and move on to our second command. This command is going to tell PowerCLI to connect into our vCenter server. The syntax for this is connect-vi server space -server, and then your vCenter server name or IP address. My vCenter server name is vmvcenter.vmlab.local. So I'm going to enter that in. Once you finish typing that out, once again, we'll click on the line number and then we'll press F8 on our keyboard. Now, PowerCLI has deemed our vCenter certificate as being an invalid certificate. Therefore, it is prompting us saying, what do you want me to do? Now, I know, and I'm very familiar with my vCenter in the lab, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Accept Permanently. Next, it's going to ask for authentication credentials into your vCenter server. I'm just going to be logging in with administrator at vSphere.local. When you get the output on the screen that looks something like this, it means that you've made a successful connection to your vCenter. Now, you're probably wondering what switches and what options do I need to know or are available to me when I run a command such as connect-vi server. To get that information out of the system, we're going to type in get-help and then space the command. So the command being connect-vi server. Once again, let's click on the line number and press F8 on the keyboard. Now it's going to download some help files to the system. So we'll go ahead and click yes here. You can see that we have a syntax section in the output, which lists all the options that accompany our command there. And then we also have a description of exactly what this command is doing. Now, remember when we ran our first command and then we went ahead and closed Windows PowerShell ISE and reopened it again? And I said that was because it needed to load the commands from that new module into the right-hand side. Well, this is what I'm going to show you now. So our next command that we're going to run is get-vm. But let's say that I didn't know that command and I wanted to search on any commands that's available to me for a VM. Then I would go onto the right-hand side in the name field and I'd type VM. And a list of all the commands that contain VM are available here or displayed to me here. The one we're going to use is get-vm. In my Windows script pane, I'm going to type get-vm. And then we are going to go ahead, select that line and press F8. Now this lists all the virtual machines that are within my vCenter environment. If I scroll up in the output window, by default, we're shown 4 columns, which are name, power state, number of CPUs, and the amount of RAM within that virtual machine. Now, the next piece of information that I'd like to know in my vCenter environment is a list of ESXi hosts. And to get that information, we are going to use a command called get-vm host. We're going to go ahead and select it and press F8. And just like that, we are presented with all the information of our ESXi hosts in our vSphere environment. The second last piece of information that I want to obtain from my environment is a list of data stores for storage. And not only do I want to see a list of data stores, I also want to sort the name column alphabetically. To do that, we're going to use this command. First, we use the get data store command, followed by pipe, and then sort object, and we're sorting by the name column. Let's select that line and run it by pressing F8. And once again, in a matter of milliseconds, it displays a list of all the data stores within my environment. And not only that, it has gone ahead and sorted that alphabetically based on the name column. Now, the next piece of information I want to grab for my vSphere environment is a list of networks, but I don't want it to display all the networks in the environment. I only want it to display any network that contains DMZ in the network name. Let's use this command. Now, first up, we get a list of networks by typing get-virtual network. And then we use pipe, and then we use where, which is like a search pretty much. We use open squiggly brackets, and then this $_name refers to the column name here. So any network that is found in the system with a name that contains DMZ, then only those networks are going to be displayed in the output. And the asterisks used on either side of that DMZ are pretty much a wildcard. So anything that exists before DMZ or after DMZ is taken into account, just as long as the name does contain DMZ somewhere there. Now check this out. We'll click on line 13 and F8. And just like that, the system displays any networks in my environment that contain DMZ. Now we're going to move on to something really cool called variables. Now let me paste the command for the variable that I'm going to be teaching you. Now if we check out the command up on screen, the variable is this $test_var. And basically it's a container. So we're saying anytime we use $test_var in our script, that's going to equal this is a test. Let's go ahead and run this and I can show you what I mean. Let's press F8. The command has run. Now to display what is in our variable, we're just going to type $test_var and then we're going to select it and run it. So there you go. Anytime we reference that $test_var, it's going to equal this is a test, which is just a line of text. Now let's take that one step further. Let's paste in this command, and we're going to be using a variable. The variable name is $VM_hosts, and we're going to put all the hosts that we can abstract from our PowerCLI command called get-vmhost. Any output from that command is going to be placed within our variable $VM_hosts. So check this out. We'd run the command, and then we're going to type in $VM_hosts, and let's have a look and see what's in this variable. So anytime that I reference $VM_hosts, it is going to equal all of this output up on screen. So you must admit that is pretty cool. But let's take this even one step further. We're now going to introduce a new command called ForEach. And ForEach is basically a loop that goes through multiple lines one by one and is able to process information. So the best way to show you is by showing you this next example. I'm going to go ahead and paste in some code. Now you're probably thinking that's a lot of code, but don't stress out. Don't worry. Let's go through it line by line and let's figure out what it's doing exactly. So we know that $VM_hosts equals all of this output down here on the screen. Now, because ForEach is like a looping mechanism, that means it's going to go through each line one by one. And as it loops through those lines, it's going to place each line one by one into $VM_host. When it processes a line, it's then going to run anything within the squiggly brackets. So we use a new command called write-host, and basically that just writes anything up onto the output window. So essentially here we're using write-host space, and then in quotation we've got some text, which is host space name colon. We close the quotation and then we output the vmhost.name. So remember, $VM_host is a single line, and then we're referencing .name, which means the name column here. So we're going to see one host referenced here, which means it's going to write up on screen host name colon and then vmhost6. Then it's going to loop around. It's going to repeat the process for the next line. And on the next line, it's going to write vmhost and then, write host and then host name colon, then vmhost5. So let's clear the screen of all my writing there. And then let's go ahead and run it. To run this, we need to select all the lines. And then once we've done that, we'll press F8 on the keyboard. Okay, so what it's done is it's processed this first line here, and then it's used vmhost6.vmlab.local in the write host output, which is what we're seeing there. And then it just repeats that process going through each line and writing the host out line by line down here. So if we highlight just $VM_host and press F8, that's what is contained within that variable. Now I can reference other columns, not only .name, but I can also reference connection state, power state, or any of those ones up on screen by simply typing $VM_host and then dot. And a matter of fact, all of the options available to us for that host are available in this window here. But if we just look up on screen at connection state and we go down, we select connection state here, we then highlight that and press F8. You can see that the output connected equals the output of this column. So now that you have in your artillery some basic PowerCLI commands, we can go ahead and take this to pro level. Now, I don't want you to get scared and freak out about the amount of code that we're going to be jumping into right now. We're going to take this step by step, and I'm going to show you exactly what each section is doing so that you don't get lost at all. Now, before we move on to this awesome next bit, I do want you to copy all those commands that are up on screen now and keep them in your own repository somewhere so that you can reference them back in the future. Right, so let's strap in and let's get ready for this next bit. What I want you to do is start a new script, and this is going to open up also a new tab. To do that, we'll just click up on here, the new script section, and voila, we have a new tab. Now I'm going to go ahead and paste in the first part of this script. Anything with a hash symbol in our code just means that we're entering in some type of comment, and anything after the hash symbol does not get executed. So at the beginning here, we've just put a little title, and then we put a version number, the date of the script, and then the author, which for the author, I want you to put your name here. Now, before we move along, I just want to say, don't worry about copying down this script line for line, because I am going to be providing it to all you sysadmins out there. The link for this script is going to be in the video description below. So go and grab that, and you can use that as you want. I'd be interested to know what you guys can come up with once you take that script, change it, and start playing around with it. Let me know in the comments below so I can check out your progress. The next part is variables, and I know that you guys are now experts in variables, but what we're doing is we're going to grab the date by using the getDate command. This is actually a PowerShell command. We're going to be grabbing that and putting it into our variable called $date. Let's just run that first line so that you can see what the output looks like. Now that date display is in day, month, year. If you're in a place like the US and you want to do month, day, year, then you can simply just change these letters around. So just put the MM in the front. So it'll be MM-DD-YYYY. The next variable is $HTML file. And this is going to equal the file location. And this file location is where we're going to be writing all our HTML code for our report. Now we put in this remove item command, and this just means that if this HTML file exists, we want to delete it from the system because we want the script to go ahead and create a new file with fresh data. Now we start to build out our HTML code. Now I don't want you to worry too much about some of the lines here. The ones I do want to show you or highlight to you is the title, and the second one being the heading. So the title is going to be the title in the tab of your browser, and the heading is going to display on the body of the report itself. If you want to go ahead and change the title or the heading, then feel free to do so. This next part of the script, again, is HTML code, and all it's really doing is telling us that anytime we would like to create a table, we want to be using this type of border and this type of padding. Next, we just move on to closing the head of the HTML file. And then we are now going to start with the body of the HTML file. And I just wanted to mention that anytime we use add-content, it is adding anything after that into the HTML file. This next part, we write into our file some more HTML code. And this part is the main table of the report. So we have our heading, and then we have our main table that looks like that. Within the main table, we're going to be creating some more headings and 2 more tables. The next part, we write into our file some HTML code that produces another heading, and that heading is called hosts. Now we start to get into some really cool parts of the code. We're going to go ahead and create a new table with a bunch of headings for our ESXi hosts. Those headings contain the name, the server model, the amount of CPUs, memory in gigabytes, the version, the build, and the overall status. Now I'm going to go ahead and run the code all the way up to this point. The code's going to go along and build our HTML file for us. And then we're going to go ahead and open that in the browser to see what it looks like so far. Now, instead of selecting all of this text and pressing F8 to run it, we can simply just press F5 and it's going to go ahead and run every single line of code within this script. So I'm going to go ahead and press F5 on the keyboard. Now this error in the script down here just says that that HTML file doesn't exist. So I don't have anything to remove. Because if we scroll back up, remember we put in that line of code that removes any old HTML files within the directory. Because there wasn't any old HTML files, we do get that error saying that it does not exist. So that is fine on the first run. Now let's go into the directory where we store our HTML file. I'm storing mine in my C drive on a directory called scripts. Here is the script file that's been created. We're going to double click on that. It opens up in our browser and this is what we've created so far. Now in this next part, we're going to go ahead and start populating the data from our ESXi hosts into this table. So let's switch back to PowerShell ISE, and on a new line, let's paste in some new code. Now the code that we're looking at is between line 65 and 94. Now there's a few commands here which I'm sure that you're quite familiar with by now. And one is the get-vm host. We then have our variable that we're putting that information into. And then we have our ForEach statement, which, remember back to the beginning of this video, was the looping mechanism that goes through the output and loops through line by line. So what we're doing is we're using get-vm hosts. We're placing the output of that command into our variable $VM hosts. We are then using the ForEach loop to go through that output line by line, and each line will be placed into $VM host variable. As it processes line by line, it's going to write the output for that host to the output window down here so that we can see what's going on. We are then going to move on and create a new row. And within that row, we're going to write data from our ESXi host. And that data is our ESXi host name, the model, the number of CPUs on that host, the amount of RAM, the version. So this is going to be ESXi 7 along with its build number. And then we're going to output the overall status. So is it green, amber, or red? We're then going to close that row. The ForEach statement is then going to loop back to the top and write all this information again for the next host. After it's finished processing all the hosts, it's then going to close off the table and close off the centering for that table as well. The centering is just so that table sits in the center of your browser. Now let's go ahead and run this entire script again by pressing F5. You can see that we have the output of our hosts here, and that is from these write host commands. If we move across to our browser, all we need to do is click up here on refresh. The HTML data is refreshed and we get all of our data up on screen within this table. Now that we have all of our information in our report for our hosts, we're going to move along and do exactly the same thing, but this time for our virtual machines. Back in Windows PowerShell ISE, I'm going to start a new line, paste some more code, and this time we are looking at everything in between these lines. In this line of code, we go ahead and create a new heading called virtual machines. We then open the code to center this new table. We create the new table. We then create a row, and within that row, we create all of these headings. So the headings being name, CPUs, memory gigabytes, storage gigabytes, power state, hardware version, VM tool status, which is super handy, and the overall status of the VM, once again being green, amber, or red. We then close off the row. Let's go ahead and run this code again, and we'll see what it looks like in our browser. Let's go ahead and press F5 on the keyboard. We'll head back to our browser and press refresh. And there we have our heading, and we have our new table with all of our headings ready for our virtual machine data to be populated. Let's jump straight back into PowerShell ISE. We'll start a new line and we'll paste in the code to get all the virtual machine data. Now we are looking at the code between line 113 and 140. By now, all of these commands should be quite familiar to you. We're going to go ahead and use the get-vm command, and then we're going to sort all the output by name. And remember, it sorts the name column alphabetically. It'll take all of that output and it will place it into this variable called $VMS. We then go through and use our ForEach statement, where we're going to loop through the output of $VMS and place each line in its own variable called $VM. We then write host. So remember, write host writes the output to our output window, and it's going to display the VM name, the number of CPUs in that VM, the amount of RAM in gigabytes on the VM, the provision space in gigabytes, so this is for storage, the power state of the VM, the hardware version, the VM tool status, is it running or is it not running, and then the overall status of the VM. We then use some HTML code to create a new row, and in that new row, we start injecting all the data that we've extracted from our get-vm command. And these values are going to be exactly the same as the values that you see up on the write host command. Now, before we run this entire script again, we are just going to close it off. So I'm going to create a new line and I'm going to paste the last bit of the code here. Now, what this part of the code does is basically just close off everything that we have open within our HTML file, that being the table, the centering, the main border table, the heading for that, the row for that. The main body is now closed off, and therefore we end with closing the HTML file. Now that we have all of that code ready, are you guys ready to run the final script? I hope the answer is yes, because I am, and I'm going to go ahead and press F5. I just want to say, if you guys have found extreme value with the content that I've delivered here today, I would highly appreciate a big thumbs up. And if you want to stay tuned and up to date with all the videos and content that's coming out in the future, then you know what to do. You hit that subscribe button and the little bell on the side. You'll be notified as soon as the content comes out. And I really appreciate all the subscribers so far and all of you guys that have left thumbs up and comments in the videos previously. Now, without further ado, let's switch over to our browser and we are going to press refresh one last time. And just like that, you have a full-blown vSphere report on your environment. If you are familiar with a piece of software called RV Tools, well, this is exactly like that. We are using PowerCLI to extract as much information as we can out of our vCenter and displaying it in our own customized report. And this is only a basic report. You can do much more stuff with PowerCLI. Before we go, I have one last question for you guys. Would you like to see any text that says powered off highlighted in red and any text that says power on highlighted in green? If you do, let me know in the comments below. And in addition to that, how would you like to have this report emailed out to you on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis? If you do, it could be the content for one of our future videos. So let me know in the comments below if that's something that you guys would like to see. Now that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed the content as much as I've enjoyed delivering it to you guys. Take care. We'll see you again in the next video. Bye for now.